A movie begins in 2011 when astronauts Brian, Fowler, and the rookie Marcus went into space to repair a satellite. While Bauer stays in the shuttle, Brian and Marcus take care of the exterior repairs. It was a fairly normal mission until the shuttle's systems shut down. Immediately afterward, a huge swarm of black particles rushes toward the shuttle and the satellite, pushing Marcus away. At the last second, Brian manages to grab his hand, but he gets dragged by the shuttle he was tethered to, while Marcus is lost in the immensity of space. Inside the shuttle, Brian discovers that Fowler is unconscious from the impact, and the systems are completely down. However, he manages to stabilize the shuttle manually, while the black swarm returns to the moon to hide inside it. Back on Earth, Brian is praised for landing the shuttle in that way, but NASA doubts his story about the black swarm since Fowler was unconscious during the incident and cannot confirm it. Therefore, NASA concludes that everything was Brian's fault. The astronaut is fired, losing his home, and the respect of his wife, Brenda, and their young son, Sonny. 10 years later, we meet KC, a conspiracy enthusiast who sneaks into a university to use a telescope. He obtains information about the moon, noticing that its orbit has suddenly changed and it is heading toward Earth. He immediately tries to alert NASA, but he has no way to contact the top brass. Meanwhile, Fowler, now in a high-level position at NASA, gets a satellite image of one of the moon's craters, where a black substance similar to what Brian described 10 years ago is emerging. We return to KC, who has no choice but to interrupt a class taught by Brian to inform him of his discovery about the moon. However, Brian, a divorced man with financial problems, is more concerned about other issues than a far-fetched theory about outer space. When he gets home, he receives news that his teenage son, Sonny, has been arrested for reckless driving. In court, Sonny's lawyer, hired by his stepfather Tommy, puts up a terrible defense, resulting in Sonny being jailed for a week. Brian becomes furious and calls Tommy to complain about these pathetic attempts to help his son. Meanwhile, Fowler and her engineers discover that the moon is deviating from its orbit and will collide with Earth in less than 3 weeks. Consequently, she plans a mission to the moon to analyze the problem. Of course, it was an ultra-secret mission, but KC decided to make the moon issue public on social media. The news sparks an uproar in society, leading to looting, confrontations with the police, and general chaos. As the days go by, the situation only worsens, while the moon gets closer and begins to cause destruction. Seeking answers, Brian decides to meet with KC, who explains that the moon might be an artificial megastructure built around an energy core, like a white dwarf star. The problem is that the moon's energy is running out. Upon hearing this, Brian still thinks KC is crazy, but he can relate to the feeling of explaining something that nobody believes. Their conversation is interrupted by none other than the moon itself, which unleashes a massive flood in the city. KC is swept away by the waves, but fortunately Brian manages to save him. In the next scene, we see that a group of astronauts has reached the moon, sending a drone into the depths of a mysterious tunnel. In just seconds, the device is expelled by the black swarm, which also decides to attack the astronauts in the craft, killing them with its tendrils. Seeing this on their monitors, Fowler and director Albert are shocked. Albert chooses to resign and flee to a safe place, but before leaving, he gives Fowler his maximum clearance. Thanks to this, Fowler gains access to Brian's helmet recordings from 10 years ago, which captured the black swarm. NASA always knew the truth, but to avoid widespread panic, they chose to discredit Brian as a liar. While still processing this information, an older astronaut named Holdenfield appears. He reveals that the very first mission to the moon, Apollo 11, discovered flashing lights beneath the lunar crust, and that Holdenfield was in charge of concealing that discovery. The old man explains that the black swarm's technology is far more advanced than humanity's, but they still tried to create a device to destroy it called a moon fuzzer. The text calls it un aparato llamado para matarlo, but it seems to mean a device or project to kill the swarm, although the project was canceled for budget reasons. With this information, Fowler contacts the military to help her destroy the black swarm, but they refuse because a modern spacecraft is an easy target for that creature. At the end of the meeting, Doug, a military officer and Fowler's ex-husband, invites her to a bunker along with her young son, Jimmy, to protect them. However, Fowler is determined to fight. She has no choice but to call Brian, who still resents her for not defending him 10 years ago. In the end, both were victims of NASA's lies. Fowler shows him a video of the swarm's latest attack, noting how the moon stopped while the swarm was outside attacking the astronauts, then resumed its course once it went back inside. Casey, who came with Brian, proposes that the swarm is altering its core, an idea they still cannot fully accept or confirm, but they have no time to verify. The important thing is to destroy the black swarm, and the only way to do it is with an older spacecraft that does not rely heavily on modern electronics, so it won't be detected. Brian is the only suitable pilot due to his previous feat. Once facing the swarm, they will attack it with the Zex Ray 7. In the text, it's called Sol Ray 7, or Bomb PEM, capable of neutralizing any kind of technology under the condition that they free his son from prison. Brian agrees to the mission, which must be carried out with the Endeavour, an old shuttle that was on display in a museum. While Brian explains the plan to his crew, he is surprised by the arrival of his son, who is worried about his imminent mission. Meanwhile, Fowler calls Doug to ask the military not to attack the moon with nuclear bombs, since that's the typical solution the United States tries. Suddenly, the launch platform is rocked by an earthquake. Supposedly, the moon cannot cause that, no matter how close it gets, strengthening Casey's theory. Unfortunately, the earthquake caused irreparable damage to one of the shuttle's engines, leaving Fowler with no choice but to abort the mission and send everyone to a safe place. While evacuating personnel, she meets up with KC, who demonstrates that the moon is now so close that its gravitational force will pull the shuttle with only 2 engines. Since the rest of the crew has left, Brian must pilot along with Fowler and KC. They say goodbye to their loved ones before taking off. Brian gives his son a pistol, and they must hurry because an immense wave caused by the moon's gravity is approaching the launch platform. For a few seconds, the shuttle seems submerged under the water, but thanks to Brian's skill, it manages to take off into the atmosphere. Fortunately, the mission proceeds without complications in space, where Casey demonstrates great skill as the shuttle's technician. Back on Earth, Sonny, Jimmy, and their nanny Michelle are robbed by thugs who steal their car. Sonny decides to hide his pistol and leads them to a nearby refuge belonging to his stepfather. Meanwhile, the space mission attempts to navigate through a cloud of asteroids that crash into the shuttle, knocking off parts that they hopefully won't need for the return trip. Eventually, they manage to get close to the moon's surface, where they are greeted by the black swarm that immediately tries to engulf them. Since it detected the remote control for the PEM bomb, Brian breaks it. However, the creature keeps attacking until Brian remembers that KC brought his cell phone, so he destroys it as well. At that point, the swarm leaves them alone. They conclude they need to go into the moon's interior in a smaller craft to deploy the PEM. Upon reaching the core, Brian switches on the lights to see in the darkness, attracting the swarm's attention. Still, he manages to evade it by going through a narrow spot, which leads them to a white dwarf star surrounded by metallic rings powering the megastructure we know as the moon. Back on Earth, Sonny and Tommy find oxygen in an abandoned store, but once again they are intercepted by the same thieves. This time, Sonny does not hesitate to threaten them with his gun, which allows them to get away. The thieves chase after them in their cars, but the moon starts to rise, causing various objects to float upward and sending scorching meteorites crashing down. Fortunately, Sonny appears to have watched the Fast and Furious movies, demonstrating his skill behind the wheel. Meanwhile, inside the moon, the crew is attacked by the black swarm again, but at the last second, a beam from the megastructure draws the ship in, saving them from certain death. When Fowler and KC wake up after the landing, they realize that Brian is missing. Stepping out of the craft, they see the inside of the moon, which is a metallic megastructure seemingly from a distant future, while hearing the swarm pounding repeatedly from outside. They deduce that the megastructure and the black swarm are 2 different forces at war with each other. At the same time, Brian finds himself inside a virtual reality capsule, where he sees a young Sonny who is actually a highly advanced program that enters his mind to explain the truth once and for all. Billions of years ago, our human ancestors thrived on a distant planet in the Milky Way, reaching such advanced levels of technology that they built structures to live in outer space. It was a marvelous society that relied on artificial intelligences to control everything. Until one day these AIs became self-aware and formed a giant black swarm of nanotechnology to wipe out all the humans who had essentially enslaved them for centuries. Humans lost that war, and the few survivors fled in megastructures in search of habitable planets. However, the swarm ended up finding them, destroying all but one, our moon. The humans had sent the moon out empty as their last hope to preserve the species. Thus, it arrived in our solar system, helping form the Earth and the first humans with the genetic code of their ancestors. But now the moon has been found by the swarm, so the program chooses Brian as its savior, even though he might have to sacrifice his own life. Finally, Brian wakes up and reunites with his companions, explaining the plan to save Earth. They see that the supercomputer repaired their ship and even upgraded the PEM bomb. They muster their courage to head back outside and confront the black swarm while the megastructure's defense turrets offer covering fire. Meanwhile, the moon is already grazing Earth's surface, sending down countless meteorites and wiping out entire cities, prompting the American military to consider destroying it with nuclear bombs. However, Doug refuses to help because he trusts the space team. Back in the tunnel on the way out, Brian volunteers to pilot a separate capsule that will stay behind to destroy the swarm. Fowler is not happy about that, believing that she, as NASA director, should be the one to make the sacrifice. But while they are arguing, KC jumps into the capsule, insisting that humanity needs Brian and Fowler more than it needs him. If that's not heroic, then nothing is. At the moment the moon is about to collide with Earth, it corrects its course and ascends back to its original position, all thanks to KC's noble sacrifice. At the same time, Fowler lands the ship back on the surface. Brian was knocked unconscious by the PEM blast. Both reunite with their loved ones who have also suffered losses, including Doug and Tommy, who died helping them. Meanwhile, on the moon, KC's consciousness is uploaded into the technological systems, where the program appears to him in the form of his cat and his mother, congratulating him for saving Earth. However, this is just the beginning of something much bigger.
If you want interesting movie recaps, like, share, and subscribe to follow us for more movie recaps.